The sand beneath the riders' hoofs was hot, like the flame of a forge. Rumors spread across the empire's borders. Tribes were preparing to strike. But even before the first enemy raised the sword, Rome already knew where and when it would happen. How? From where did legates learn the enemy's routes, the number of their warriors, even the location of their camps? Who whispered these secrets to them? And most importantly, where did those who conveyed such information disappear to? The answer is hidden in a system whose network stretched from the northern bogs of Britannia to the sands of Syria. But it can only be understood by dissecting how the world's oldest intelligence operated. Where swords clashed, victory depended not on strength, but on knowledge. Historian Tacitus wrote that the empire's best commanders triumphed not thanks to the number of legions, but because they knew the enemy before the enemy knew about them. Thus was born a shadow that accompanied every legion, a network of invisible observers which today would be called an intelligence service. Romans called such people speculatores, scouts and spies who mingled with merchants, slaves, actors. Their task was simple, to see and report, but behind the simplicity lay hell. Enemies gouged out their eyes if they suspected deception. Therefore speculatores often worked in pairs, one spoke, the other observed. Imagine, not as a spectator, but as a person in their place. Night, step, the Rhine behind you. You hear a dog barking loudly in the enemy camp. One wrong step, and you'll be hung by your feet at the gates. And at dawn your commander will already have a map with markings of roads he has never seen. This is how Rome's tactical magic was created. Not in magic, but in information. These people operated under the cover of the legions, but did not belong to them. They were the eyes of the empire. And when a legate made a decision about an offensive, he relied not only on the reports of tribunes, but also on the secret dispatches of speculatores. Archaeological finds in northern Britannia confirm the existence of hidden observation posts, small fortifications with secret entrances designed for 2 or 3 people. Their signal fires could warn an entire army in a matter of minutes. Rome created not just intelligence, but a system of world observation. It was here that the idea of secret state agents first appeared in history. And this was just the beginning. Soon the empire would learn to use spies not only in war, but also in politics, among enemies and allies. For Rome understood, information is power, and power demands a shadow. And as the empire expanded, its network of shadows grew with it, from the eastern bazaars to the alpine passes, where even the wind seemed like the whisper of invisible ears. At the very heart of the legion, amidst banners and drums, lay a hidden power that ordinary soldiers knew only by rumor. These people did not wear heavy armor and did not shout in battle. They vanished before dawn and returned when everyone already thought they were dead. They were called frumentarii, literally grain collectors, but their real work had only a symbolic connection to grain. They fed the empire not with bread, but with information. Initially, they were used for delivering messages and collecting taxes, as the historian Frontinus wrote. But the wider the borders became, the more information the center required. And then the frumentarii transformed into secret agents, Rome's first bureaucratic spies. They traveled under the guise of merchants or tax collectors, but in reality they recorded suspicious troop movements, rumors of conspiracies, grain prices, for it was through these that one could understand where a rebellion was brewing. The Romans created a special term for such covert missions, cursus publicus, the state courier system. Through it, frumentarii could traverse thousands of kilometers, changing horses at stations and delivering reports faster than a candle's light could burn down. This was the prototype of an intelligence infrastructure, with secret depots, safe houses and false inns. Contemporaries said, "Travel safely if you haven't met a frumentarius, otherwise it's better to keep silent." Now imagine the noise of a tavern somewhere in Antioch. The smell of wine, the conversations of merchants, and among them, one person who simply listens. He drinks little, but remembers every name, every accent. The next day, a scroll leaves for Rome with a brief phrase, "Ferment in the Syrian garrison." This is how, from tiny hints, the map of threats for the entire empire was formed. Frumentarii reported not to military commanders, but personally to the emperor. Under Trajan, their headquarters were located on the Esquiline Hill, in the Castra Peregrina barracks. There, secret reports and lists of agents were kept, known only to a select few. Some historians believe that Castra Peregrina became the prototype for future intelligence headquarters, where military reports and political intrigues intersected. However, the power of these people grew faster than the system itself could sustain. Senators and proconsuls feared them. Frumentarii could appear at the home of any official, asking just one question, in the name of the emperor. Plutarch wrote that the fear of them was stronger than of a praetorian's sword. They collected not only military intelligence, but also denunciations, personal secrets, even conversations at banquet tables. Sensory details from those times speak more than reports. In letters from Egypt, archaeologists found complaints about unknown people who listen in taverns and disappear before dawn. Sometimes their bodies were found later, with no signs of struggle, but with their tongues cut out. Perhaps these were punishments for treason, perhaps a way to conceal their true identity. Yet their work saved armies and cities. When the Jewish revolt erupted in 115 AD, it was the reports of the Frumentarii that allowed Emperor Trajan to redeploy legions in advance and avoid disaster. But with successes came a shadow. The empire increasingly used spies against its own citizens. Rome learned not only to defend itself, but also to monitor. Thus, intelligence transformed from a military necessity into an instrument of control. The emperor received information faster than the Senate, and this broke ancient traditions. The Frumentarii became the eyes of despotism, a secret police before whom the nobility trembled. Their power, like poison, permeated all spheres of life, until the system itself began to crumble under the weight of its own secrets. When subjects began to hate them more than enemies, Rome was forced to reform its shadow. Under Diocletian, at the end of the 3rd century, the Frumentarii were officially disbanded. In their place came new agents, agentes in rebus, those acting in affairs. More secretive, more trained, and even more dangerous. They became the face of a new era of intelligence, an era where information decided the fates of emperors. And now, as old Rome drowned in its intrigues, those who wielded the most lethal weapon of antiquity, knowledge of everyone who breathed in the empire, stepped onto the stage. With the dawn of a new century, the empire changed its appearance, and with it, its shadow changed too. Where the noisy Frumentarii once operated, a new race of silent and invisible people arrived. They were called agentes in rebus, those acting in affairs. But those who encountered them called them simply people without faces. They could be anywhere, in baths, in forums, in caravans. No one knew who they were until it was too late. If the Frumentarii were spies in uniform, then the agentes in rebus transformed into the prototype of modern special services. They reported to the Magister Officiorum, the supreme official of the imperial chancellery, who held authority over mail, communications, and internal security. Diocletian created a structure from them resembling a nervous system. Each province had its own agent, each road its own communication point. They were the eyes and ears not of the army, but of the state itself. The sensory image of this time is a city in fog. Footsteps sounded on the streets, but it was not visible who was walking. Any phrase could become a denunciation, any letter evidence. An agent in affairs could be the one who brings water or the one who writes chronicles. In the reports of the historian Ammianus Marcellinus, it is stated that agents controlled even the correspondence of officers. They were trained to observe, be silent, and suddenly disappear. A special term born in this era was cursus secretus, the secret road. This was a network of hidden routes and postal stations through which agents transmitted reports. Along the roads stood secret posts with horses, supplies, and even clothes of different peoples, so that an agent could change his guise as a snake sheds its skin. According to archaeologists, taverns have been found in some parts of the Balkans with hidden compartments in their walls for encrypted scrolls. Precisely such objects were described by Lactantius. Romans for the first time created a system where information moved faster than the army. When a rebellion erupted on the Danube, Constantinople knew about it within a few days. This was a miracle of logistics and control, but in every miracle of Rome lay a price. Agentes in rebus became an instrument of fear. Their denunciations could overthrow any military commander, and often it was they who decided who would live and who would disappear into the depths of prison casemates. Plutarch wrote that in Rome people stopped trusting even the walls. Ordinary citizens hid conversations behind closed doors, and officials destroyed letters after reading them. One wrong glance could cost a career. And yet, for the empire, these people were necessary. They held together a gigantic system where thousands of cities and millions of subjects were connected by a single network of power. To understand the scale, it is worth knowing. According to modern historians' estimates, under Constantine the Great, the number of agents reached several thousand. They had ranks, from cursores who delivered reports to comites who were responsible for intelligence in entire provinces. Each agent had to know ciphers, codes, and methods of transmitting signals, from light flashes on towers to secret marks on columns. And all this was accompanied by an atmosphere of cold dread. Legionaries whispered about the disappearances of commanders. Senators wrote speeches glancing at the doors. Even bishops confessed, "We pray to God, but we fear the agents." In this system, fear became part of the order. And yet, paradoxically, it was fear that saved the empire. It held it back from internal collapse while barbarians raged on its borders. Ammianus's reports mention an instance when Agentes in Rebus prevented a mutiny of an entire legion in Thrace by intercepting letters between officers. This episode became an example of how information could stop a war without a single sword. But for such successes, the empire paid by losing its soul. In late Roman ruins, archaeologists find bronze tablets with coded symbols, presumably signs of agents. They remind us that when everything was crumbling, Rome already knew it is not the strongest who survives, but the one who knows more. And it was this knowledge, precise, dispassionate, merciless, that became the empire's last weapon before the smoke of a new, barbarian world rose over its borders. At the close of the 4th century, Rome's shadows stretched to the very edges of Europe. The empire breathed heavily, like an old warrior after a long march. Barbarians approached the borders, and each day could be the last. But even now, as cities burned, intelligence continued to operate. Now it became not just a shield, but the empire's last nerve. If previously agents in affairs monitored order, now they sought out betrayal. Everywhere it was not yet present. Ammianus's chronicles reveal, during the times of Valentinian and Theodosius, agents gathered information not only about enemies, but also about their own generals. Rome was losing trust in itself. And yet, it was this distrust that kept the system from complete collapse. For every leak of information could cost the fall of an entire province. One reporting agent could save a legion, one silent one destroy an army. At this time, exploratores operated on the northern borders of the Rhenish limes, the field scouts of the legions. Unlike the emperor's agents, these people lived alongside soldiers and shared bread with them, but their missions were far more dangerous. They crossed enemy lines, observed the movements of Goths, Franks, Alemanni, and transmitted information about routes and breaches in fortifications. They were trained to recognize tribal insignia and to interrogate a captive in such a way that he would not realize he had already given away information. Exploratores were the eyes on the battlefield. Their work began before the standards were even raised. They hid in bushes, watched for smoke on the horizon, counted the number of campfires in barbarian camps. One of the terms that emerged precisely then was stationes, temporary observation posts, hidden outposts, which served as prototypes for military outposts. Archaeologists have found remains of such posts near the Limes Germanicus, tiny forts with narrow viewing slits from which only the tops of trees were visible. But even under such conditions, discipline remained ironclad. An explorator had no right to return without information. In the Roman army, a scout's failure was considered not a mistake, but a disgrace. One of the papyri found in Egypt contains the record: did not return means died as a soldier. This harsh logic nurtured a generation of invisible heroes whose names are not preserved in chronicles, but thanks to whom the legions still knew where and when to strike. Military reports from the late 4th century show that intelligence was integrated into the command structure. Centurions received scrolls with notes on weather, enemy movements, and road conditions. Rome became dependent on information, like an organism on blood. Even as legions dwindled, intelligence services continued to grow. This was the last rational part of the empire, precise, cold, almost mathematical. But with this, paranoia also intensified. Emperors suspected everyone. After the death of Valens at Adrianople in 378 AD, mass purges began in the army. They searched for traitors who gave the Goths the path to the ambush. Historians still debate whether there was a leak or if it was chaos. However, from this moment, intelligence became not only a defense, but also a weapon of politics. Now spies caught not enemies, but convenient culprits. And yet, on the borders, another, honest shadow continued to live. Soldiers' reconnaissance. Exploratores used signal towers with mirrors and smoke, transmitting news for dozens of kilometers. Modern calculations show that in good weather, a message could travel from the Moselle to the Rhine in one day. This was ancient Roman optics, technology ahead of its time. Historian Goldsworthy writes that Roman intelligence in the late period became a mixture of military genius and political fear. On every section of the limes stood people who knew the enemy by face, and yet knowledge did not save the empire. It prolonged its life, but did not grant immortality. When Alaric's Visigoths entered Italy in the early 5th century, agents already knew about it in advance, but no one believed their reports. And yet, these last years, the peak of Roman intelligence. Even as legions retreated, agents continued to whisper in the shadows, who spoke with whom, where detachments moved, which cities still held out. In that era, intelligence became the empire's last valor, its residual will to control chaos. And while walls crumbled, while barbarian swords clanked in Roman streets, somewhere far away, on the scorched borders, an explorator still watched the horizon, silently, precisely, without fear. He already knew that the empire would fall, but a scout's duty is not salvation, but knowledge. And even when Rome turned to ash, its shadows continued to look forward. When the empire began to fray at the seams, its intelligence, like a nerve, continued to transmit signals even from the dead parts of the body. In the ruins of the western provinces, there still lived those who knew the ciphers and could read the enemy's tracks. They no longer served an emperor, he was no more. But the habit of watching and listening remained. These people transformed into an invisible bone that connected Rome's past with Europe's future. After the sack of Rome by Alaric in 410 AD, when flames reflected in the marble of temples, it was the former agentes in rebus who saved archives and maps of imperial roads. They carried out scrolls with the roots of the cursus secretus, as if saving the heart of a deceased organism. Thanks to these documents, later barbarian kings, Ostrogoths, Franks, Vandals, were able to govern territories that had once been subject to Rome. Historian Sayer wrote, "Even in ruins, the empire remained a teacher of control." At that time, a new figure emerged, an intermediary between the dying intelligence and the new power. He was called a notarius, a scribe, but essentially he was an agent of information. He recorded who paid whom, who was loyal to whom, who was fleeing, and who was spying. These people from the chancelleries of Diocletian and Theodosius became the architects of future intelligence systems of medieval states. Their ability to gather information and keep secrets became the basis of what would later be called ars secreta, the art of secrets, in monasteries. The eastern part of the empire, Byzantium, inherited this shadow and perfected it. Here, intelligence transformed into a cold, impeccable mechanism. Under Emperor Justinian, mid-6th century, there was an entire network of agens peregrinus, traveling agents, sent to the east into the lands of the Persians. They brought information about Sasanian troops, new fortifications on the Tigris and caravan routes. Sometimes they had to live under false names for years. Justinian understood knowledge is not only defense, but also diplomacy. His spies participated in secret negotiations, bribed merchants, wrote fake letters to sow discord among the barbarians. One of the terms of that time, apostolos, meant not only an envoy, but also a scout on a mission. These people didn't just collect information, they created it, rewriting reality for the emperor's interests. The image of the era is silence behind the marble walls of Constantinople. In the corridors of the Great Palace, a whisper was valued higher than a shout. Here, agents lived like monks, without family, without a name, without hope for glory. Their work consisted of observation, but not only of the enemy. They watched patricians, comites, even members of the imperial family. The empire survived because it learned to look at itself from within. During this time, intelligence gained a new dimension, diplomatic. Embassies became a cover for gathering information. Byzantine emissaries in the east studied not only military routes, but also technologies, methods of metal smelting, designs of siege engines, even the shapes of enemy helmets. Contemporaries called this knowledge intelligence. Thus, from a military shadow grew the prototype of future scientific intelligence. But the main task remained survival. In the north, the Slavs advanced, in the east, the Persians, and within Constantinople, a network of traitors grew. To maintain power, emperors created a prototype of a secret police, bucellarii, personal bodyguards who could spy on generals. They were soldiers, but with the function of investigators. Their letters were intercepted, their conversations recorded. Fear became a new form of loyalty. Historian Procopius wrote that the emperor wished to know not only who acts, but also who is silent. These words accurately describe the essence of Byzantine intelligence. It ceased to be merely data collection and became a psychological weapon. It created an atmosphere in which every citizen felt a gaze behind their back. Nevertheless, it was this constant surveillance that allowed Byzantium to survive for centuries. When the Western world plunged into chaos, a network of roads, secret stations and agents still operated here. They warned of nomadic movements, of the plans of merchant guilds, of the gold that flowed through the deserts. Byzantium inherited not Rome's army, but its ability to know more than the enemy, more than the people, more than history itself. Thus, intelligence, which began with the quiet steps of speculatores, transformed into an entire philosophy of power. It no longer merely protected the empire, it became its heart, its circulatory system. And although old Rome vanished, its shadows did not dissipate, they merely changed language and form, and prepared to take their last majestic step, a step into a future where information would become a new form of dominance. When the last torch of Rome extinguished, its intelligence did not die. It dissolved, like smoke curling over embers, until the wind carried it to new shores. Shadows, trained in the discipline of legions and the cold calculation of emperors, went into monasteries, into the courts of barbarian kings, into the caravans of the East. They no longer called themselves agents, but the memory of their art lived on in every letter with a secret mark, in every gaze that lingered too long on a stranger's face. And yet it was Rome that gave the world the main understanding. Strength lies not in swords, but in information. When the Ostrogoths built their kingdoms, they adopted not only the roads, but also the system of surveillance. In the Ostrogothic kingdom under Theodoric, there were tabularii, scribes who collected reports from merchants and warriors. These were the same old agentes in rebus, just in a new guise. And later, Charlemagne would create his network of missi dominici, royal envoys, and each of them would perform functions conceived back in Castra Peregrina. The Roman shadow simply changed its master. Archaeologists find bronze plates with scratched letters SPQR on the ruins of former forts alongside symbols of later eras. This is like the trace of an intelligence signature, the last breath of the empire, saying, "We still see." Even centuries later, people continued to live under the gaze that originated in Rome. This shadow changed the world. From the secret scribes of the Papal Curia to the first spies of Genoa and Venice, from the Muslim intelligence agents of the Caliphate to the secret agents of Byzantium, all of them used principles developed by the Romans: to observe without interfering, to speak little but report accurately, to fear, and therefore to survive. In the Tactica of the Byzantine Emperor Leo VI, it is directly stated, "It is better to lose a legion than a word spoken to the wrong person." This phrase is the last echo of Roman intelligence discipline. The sensory picture of the finale, an evening in an empty forum, marble cracked, grass grows between the columns, but if you listen closely, it seems as if life is still beating somewhere underground, a faint but unextinguished impulse. This is intelligence, the memory of the empire. its pulse, continuing to beat through the centuries. In this hidden legacy there is more than just a history of wars. It is the history of the human gaze. In every century, in every state, someone takes on the role of the shadow, the one who knows but does not speak. In Rome it was a matter of survival, in the future a matter of power. And from the speculatores to modern intelligence analysts, intelligence has retained one essence: knowledge, obtained in silence, decides the fates that roar in the noise. Romans believed that all secrets came to light only when someone broke the vow of silence. But their agents rarely broke it. They disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only the result: a warning, a victory, a city saved. Thus, invisible people saved what armies could not have defended, and in this lies the paradox of the empire. It collapsed from external blows, but spiritually outlived all its enemies. Barbarians burned its temples, but adopted its system of power, roads, and surveillance. Even modern intelligence, where satellites have replaced towers and ciphers, wax tablets, still repeats the Roman formula: to see is to rule. Historians debate when Rome ended, in 476 AD, when the last emperor was overthrown, or much later, when its habits of thinking and planning disappeared. But perhaps Rome never truly died. It simply changed form. From a city, it transformed into a network. For everything its spies created, the idea of control through knowledge lives on today. And now, knowing this history, one might ask themselves, if Rome survived not by the sword but by shadow, are we not repeating its path? When every step is recorded, every word written, and every thought becomes data, have we not ourselves become the heirs of those who once observed from behind the walls of the limes?